DCEU is over. A reboot is right around the corner. So it's time to stop and rank every DCEU villain from the worst to the best one last time. While I'm talking, be sure to join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of the DCEU villains. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. One more thing before we get started. Today's video is brought to you by Rocket Money. I watch movies for a living, so naturally I have a lot of streaming services, and I'll sign up for a new one just to watch one movie and forget about it. My kids signed up for a streaming service because they're getting into anime. I recently realized I had two different subscriptions to the same streaming service. Well, today's sponsor, Rocket Money, is here to help. With Rocket Money, you can save more and manage your money better. This personal finance app allows you to manage your subscription, lower your bills, build a custom budget, and build out your savings all in one place. One of the great things about Rocket Money is that it can cancel unwanted subscriptions. Safely and securely, it can identify reoccurring charges and cancel unwanted subscriptions. You can even cancel them in the app with just a couple of taps. Using the app, I've identified several subscriptions I don't need anymore, and it also will tell you how much some of these subscriptions are costing you every single year. To save more and spend less, join the over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. Go to rocketmoney.com/Sean Chandler or click the link down below in the description and get started for free. And let's start ranking. Last, Enchantress and her brother. Now, I would love to know what David Ayer's actual plan was for these characters. How did this play out in his version of the film? But the movie that was released is just this jumbled mess of underdeveloped and unexplored ideas. Her brother is completely superfluous. He serves no purpose in the story. And it's a big deal that we bring him back, but then he does nothing, and there's no emphasis on him. He's just kind of there. Even Enchantress, there's a couple fun ideas, a couple cool images with how she uses her powers, but then she spends the rest of the movie just like dancing and standing in front of her sky beam, and their exact plan, motivation, everything going on, it's all just messy as can be, as if the movie was reshot and reworked last minute to turn it into something else and has a completely reshot ending that doesn't match the first half of the film. Oh yeah, that is what happened. Kordax from Aquaman to this is the behind-the-scenes villain that is trying to manipulate Black Manta to free him at the end of the film. There could have been something really cool here, because they allude to all of this lore of what if he gets released, what's he trying to do to the Earth? And then they kind of botch it in the end by when he finally gets freed, Aquaman just has to throw 2 Tritons at him and we're done. We won. We did it. And it's just disappointing because the lore was interesting. The character was nothing. 26, Steppenwolf and the Parademons from Justice League. Now, since we've seen Zack Snyder's Justice League, we know that there was a more interesting version of this character and his army. But in the theatrically released film, he's just a totally generic space conqueror with no personality traits, nothing that feels like it's tied to how he's wired and what he wants other than mother.
Mother, at last you call me home.
And he just keeps awkwardly talking about mother, and he's strong because he wants mother. As so just a very flat villain with fear demons that just don't whelm at all. 25, Ishmael, Gregor, Sabbac from Black Adam. And as you'll notice, you can't see me right now because Sabbac is so forgettable, I forgot to record the segment about him during the primary shoot. So this is an audio punch-in. This is the main villain in Black Adam, and there's a little bit of mythology built out here about who he is, what he's trying to do, and have the big reveal, but like there's just nothing distinct, interesting, memorable about either rendition here. The Ishmael Gregor, it's like, oh yeah, that character was in the movie, right? And then even as I was putting this list together, I was trying to remember, like, what does the villain at the end look like? What does he do? And I don't remember any of it. I remember what Dr. Fate did. I remember the choices of our heroes in this movie and what that looked like. But as for our villain himself, just completely and totally generic, forgettable, ancient god with lots of power that wants more power. Major General Mateo Suárez of Corto, Maltese, and his affiliates from the Suicide Squad. Now, he's lower on this list, but I think him and his army serve their purpose in this story, which is they're just the ones populating the island, creating the upheaval, the obstacle in the way between our characters getting from the beginning of the film to Starro, adding some twists and turns. They're not really designed to be more than that. You don't want them to be much more than that. And so even though they're low on this list, it's not necessarily a knock on them. It's just that they serve him and they serve as a plot point more so than actual characters. 23, Victoria Cord, Blue Beetle. I'm disappointed Susan Sarandon has to be this low on the list. She does bring a bit of gravitas to the film. She's a nice recruit for the DCEU. But the character is just another person who feels scorned over not inheriting enough. They're just another evil business person looking to make weapons.
We are going to change the world with the power of the scarab. It belongs to me.
And we've seen this before, and she's just kind of a less interesting version of it because they don't even let her kind of get in on the action, so she's just the well-dressed woman with evil motivations. Dark Flash from The Flash. And this one is another one, kind of like Major General Mateo Suárez, where it's more of a plot point than a character. So the journey is all about Flash's desire to save his mother by changing the timeline. And built inside of that is this desire to do something that it's not really what his powers are meant to be. And so being able to have that character arc and let go of the past, move on, is the journey that he needs to learn. That's what he needs to, how he needs to change for this movie to work and have its emotional payoff. And so then through time travel and all the shenanigans that go along with that, you create Dark Flash, the version of him that never learned the lesson. And he's not really a presence throughout the movie. He's like a little tease at the beginning, sets things in motion, and then as we get later into the film, he shows up just to kind of explain what's going on. And he serves that purpose of helping good Barry, good Flash, understand he has to let go and move on. But he's not really a character with depth or layers to him. So I kind of like the idea there. It is a weird third act. It is it is a very strange way to do things. I understand why it didn't work for some people, but I think it works as balancing out our hero. 21, Joker from Suicide Squad, and just a little bit at the end of Zack Snyder's Justice League. Now, I understand a lot of people really did not like this take on Joker. I think it probably is our weakest version of the Joker that we've ever gotten. But I don't think that means it's like an actual terrible version of the character. I think too much of it is way on the nose, where he's tattooed with damaged on his forehead. And David Ayer has this very specific vibe and aesthetic that he brings to a lot of his movies, from his upbringing, where he came from. I think it's from the part of LA that he grew up in. And he kind of puts that on to Joker, where he's got the grill and everything like that, and all the tattoos. And
so I made a decision, and it was wrong. It was a bad call, Ripley. It was a bad call.
Bad call.
Right.
I just don't think it matches. So there's just a lot of disappointing choices in what they did with the Joker. But I don't think it was awful. I just don't think it was a great version of the character. There's a few moments that are kind of interesting, but overall you're taking like an A-plus villain and lowering him down to something much weaker. Bringing us into the top 20, OMAC from Blue Beetle. And I think this character had all the ingredients to be higher up on this list, but because he was just kind of the hired muscle, it didn't give him enough screen time to get fully fleshed out and developed properly to kind of make it higher up on this list. But I think they gave him a vibe where he certainly had a presence. As soon as he showed up, you could tell, ooh, this guy's a serious threat to Blue Beetle. As the movie went along, you could tell that he was more conflicted about everything that was kind of going on.
The love you feel for your family makes you weak.
And then by the end of it, you get his full backstory and understand everything that was going on, leading to this moment, what he was doing, and the final choices that he made. But it felt a little bit like too little too late, where we needed to maybe establish some of this stuff earlier on and give a few more layers of complexity to his decision making. And if they'd done that, given him more development, then he could have been higher up on this list. And that was just a little bit tough to do in a movie that wasn't aiming to be super long, and that it was about Jaime's whole family. So you can only have so much time for the hired gun character in the film. Next up, Doomsday in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Now, Doomsday, of course, is just a boss fight. That is all Doomsday is supposed to be, just this unstoppable monster that the only way to kill Doomsday is to sacrifice Superman to do it. That's what Doomsday was invented to do in the comic books. That's how Doomsday was used in Batman v Superman. And so there's, of course, not really character development here. It's just a matter of how much of an impact did this boss fight character make? How much do you really remember what they did with a character that has no dialogue, no real characterization other than rah, destroy? And that's why I think Doomsday very much serves Doomsday's purpose. They found a way to kind of borrow from the ingredients that were in Man of Steel about the Kryptonian technology, bringing in just a little bit of kryptonite. And so you make Doomsday this Frankenstein monster version of revived Zod, and thus tying into the lore that's established, the technology that's already present, and giving this boss fight that has lots of energy to it, iconic imagery in it, and of course the iconic death of Superman. So yeah, absolutely simplistic, but if you're gonna do a boss fight in one of these movies, this was a good boss fight. 18, Eek Stack Ik Ik, also known as Goff, as well as Judemaster. I'm sure I butchered that first name. Also, the reason that Judemaster is mashed in here is quite literally because I forgot about Judemaster until I was filming this video and realized, uh-oh, there's one more villain in Peacemaker. He was going to be right around here anyway, so we're getting a twofer right here at number 18, a value pack number. So anyway, with our main villain, Goff, I think there's a really strong motivation there where you have a villain that has reason for fleeing to the Earth, reason for doing what they're doing, that there's, if you take away our morality and value set, you can see where an alien coming in saying like, hey, we're going to help you guys protect your planet. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in that. Possibly should have been introduced earlier on to have more of a discussion of the value of validity of the arguments from Goff and what he's trying to do, as opposed to like a exposition dump right before murdering the characters. But with the character, because we're doing Invasion of the Body Snatchers with these butterflies, we're seeing a character that's Goff pretend to be someone else, and then as a bug that can't communicate, and then a character over here that's just trying to get somewhere, just kind of turns into an exposition dump character with it's tough to find a distinct personality, unfortunately. And then with Judemaster, this is a fun side character. Not a whole lot more, but just kind of a scene-stealing guy that gets in fights and beats people up, and it's funny because he's so small, but he keeps winning in the fight. So, a fun, memorable side character. 17, St. Patrick Morgan, or Ares from Wonder Woman. This one is a little bit frustrating to me because I feel like if we had done Ares not so much as a twist villain reveal, but rather as a presence throughout more of the film, everything that's here with the character would have worked a little bit better. So the best thing about the character is the way that Ares challenges the worldview of Wonder Woman, where a lot of the DC films, they actually kind of have a little bit more philosophy to them. They're exploring kind of more ideas and themes. This is the character that did it, but they save all of that until we're in the third act, where all of a sudden we're having long monologues followed by a CGI boss fight with a character that just kind of came out of nowhere, putting armor on.
And you blew it! You blew it.
And a lot of that's really good, but it's a very clunky way to do your third act. And so if they'd spaced that out, I think Ares could have been a better villain if we spent more time with the real villain, not Sir Patrick Morgan. And even like, it's even one of those ones like, oh yeah, Ares is the villain to it. Oh yeah, there's a villain twist with it. Oh yeah, like all that stuff's kind of forgettable despite the ideas being interesting. 16, Lex Luthor, Batman v Superman. This is another one of these ones where people were not terribly kind to this version of the character. Since right around the time they were casting Lex Luthor was at the peak of Breaking Bad fame, and our Walter White himself had a shaved head, a lot of people were crossing their fingers for Heisenberg as Lex Luthor, and instead they got Eisenberg as Lex Luthor doing his Mark Zuckerberg, except even weirder and quirkier. And a lot of people didn't respond well to that. And I think that's fair. I think this is another example of taking kind of this A-plus villain and lowering him down with some ideas that just didn't really work. But I don't think it's devoid of merit, where it's trying to be this 21st century version of these characters, and you have these young dudes getting these in charge of companies with the world of social media. So the idea of having a Lex Luthor inspired by Mark Zuckerberg and things like that kind of makes a lot of sense. And even inside of it, the way that they use the events of Man of Steel to motivate Batman and Lex Luthor, Bruce Wayne, to go into action. You have this contrast of two different, very powerful men see Superman show up and they respond to it. There's some very interesting ideas in there that I think do work, but because the superficial side to him is so weird and such an odd personality that they gave to him, it knocks him back a good bit.
Wow, that was weird.
15, Cheetah from Wonder Woman 1984. And this is always a little bit of a tricky one for me to talk about because I don't think the movie works all that well, and so much of it boils down to the whole monkey's paw plot line where we're granting wishes, and Cheetah gets her powers via making this wish. And so her entire arc is so tied to the plot that it's tough to entirely divorce them. But I think that they give a very interesting arc to her if you can get past all the problems with the plot where this all takes place and how goofy she looks in the final battle of the movie. But having this character that has lacked confidence, lacked a strong assertiveness, sees Diana, wants to be her, and doesn't realize what she's actually wishing for when she says that. And in the process, she gains the superficial aspects of Wonder Woman minus the internal love, care, concern from people that she had before. I think that that's actually a really interesting arc, that as she becomes what she thinks is great, she loses what actually made her great. That's an interesting idea. There's a lot to that I enjoy. It just happens to be in a movie in a context that it doesn't work all that well in the film. Next up, General Ludendorff and Dr. Poison from Wonder Woman. And in a lot of ways, they're kind of the side villains, but they're also kind of the lead villains that are pushing the plot forward during the main section of it. And they're not designed to be big and flashy and memorable. They're designed to demonstrate the actual real world inhumanity to man inside of World War I. And that's kind of why they're higher up than Ares, because it's truly terrifying to think about everything that was actually taking place in World War I, as well as the other wars of human history. And you have people with such lack of regard for other humans. And you tell this story that is very fantastical with a wonderful woman with powers and a sword, but then they find a way to anchor it with villains who are just evil. And Wonder Woman has a hard time seeing that for a long time. Oh, they have to be motivated by Ares. This has to be Ares. Like, no, mankind is broken. And so I liked all those aspects. 13, Maxwell Lord, Wonder Woman 1984. Just copy and paste what I said about the plot of Wonder Woman 1984, apply it to him as well. The thing right here is you have a character that is at the center of a very goofy, strange, convoluted plot that makes no sense, but he makes a mark. You remember his lines.
Life is good, but it can be better.
You remember all of that because Pedro Pascal has just such a screen presence and can take this very corny villain with baffling motivations and make him someone you remember. And you think so many other characters lower on this list that they're more threatening, doing actual boss fight type stuff, but they're forgettable. And you absolutely remember Maxwell Lord because of Pedro Pascal. So sometimes just a performance, an actor can just lift something up and just leave that mark on your brain. 12, 7 Deadly Sins from Shazam. It's kind of an interesting one. In Shazam, you have our human villain trying to gain powers, and then you have these evil demon things that are giving him the powers. And this is kind of a recurring theme in comic book movies. It's kind of our next to last one. Kordax does this with Black Manta in the new Aquaman movie. A number of MCU films do this. And what the 7 Deadly Sins does well is it actually gives them personalities because they are the 7 Deadly Sins. And so while they are a group of these demon creatures that are killing people, they have something distinct, interesting, and memorable about them. And it sets up the scenario where we get the Shazam family in the end of the film, and our different Shazam family members are battling these 7 different deadly sins, and each one of them, like, it's a very simplistic characterization, but there's a thing there. There's something that they are pushing the evil in characters and trying to make things happen. I just think that's kind of interesting. 11, Starro from the Suicide Squad, the kaiju of the DCEU, and one of the very few kaijus we've gotten in comic book movies, and a villain that is in many ways a victim. Well, in most ways a victim. And that's kind of what makes Starro interesting to me, is that they create a scenario where you feel awful for Starro, but you can't let Starro kill all the people in Corto Maltese simply because you feel bad for him. You can't let him turn everyone into one of his zombies because you feel bad for him. So, like, everything that we learn about him makes us wish that this scenario didn't happen. It makes us hate Amanda Waller even more. It makes us wish that Starro could have remained amongst the stars. But that's not what happened, and he is going wild, so he has to be stopped. And I think that's where you have a villain that works. Doesn't need dialogue, doesn't need all this other stuff. You actually feel bad for him, but you also know he needs to be stopped. Kicking off our top 10, Black Mask from Birds of Prey in the unbearably long title, also known as Harley Quinn. I know that this is a movie that a lot of you don't resonate with. I've always enjoyed it as kind of this street level, almost like Guy Ritchie movie set in the DCEU in Gotham. And to that point, you have a very fun Ewan McGregor playing this very wild, over-the-top character that doesn't have a big, gigantic villain scheme. He's just a bad dude that doesn't care about other people and is trying to gain more power and stuff like that. And that's kind of what I like. There's not all this other stuff to it. It is just this personality and spending time in this little world of crime. Having these little scenes where this guy that's very kind of like high energy, almost like charisma to him, and then in this moment, like, wigs out, and he's like trying to force a woman to strip on a table, and it's like instantly terrifying that he just can snap like that. He can ask his buddy over there to kill someone just like that. And so, not the most compelling villain scheme, but for the movie that they were telling, it was about hanging out in street level Gotham, exactly what the movie needed.
Ooh, I love it.
Next up, Dr. Sivana from Shazam. And one of the most common things to do in comic book movie villains is introduce a villain, which is an evil version of the hero. A lot of the times it feels a little bit forced when they do that. But in the mythology of Shazam, it actually makes sense, where you have this scenario where at a very young age, this child is taken and is potentially going to be Shazam. And in this context, where they're analyzing personality, is this a good person? This is not a good person. This is not our champion. Next, we need someone else. And the whole basis of the character is that there's something bleak and dark inside of him. Almost certainly largely because of his upbringing, everything like that. But he's deeply broken and not an actual champion, a hero. So they don't choose him. And when you're a person of bad character that's deeply broken and you get a taste of power, it's out there. You can feel it a little bit. That's all he lives for and wants is that. And also just from a performance standpoint, as kind of this character playing it straight against this very lively Zachary Levi as Shazam, there's a lot of fun humor, jokes, opportunities that come from that. But I think they just found the right motivation character arc that they could integrate throughout this entire film that counterbalances with Billy, who wasn't looking to be a hero. He's also deeply broken from his childhood, but at his core, he's good, and therefore is the right person to give the powers to. And that balance, I think, is what makes him interesting. 8, Victor Zsasz from Birds of Prey. Once again, copy and paste what I said about Birds of Prey. Drop it right here. And in this world where we're doing street level crime, I think Victor Zsasz is one of the standout little side villains. He doesn't really have any motivation that we're aware of. He doesn't have any sort of scheme. He's just sick and twisted and memorable. And if you've only watched the movie once, it's easy to even kind of forget his contributions to the film. But all throughout the movie, he's the guy that's like whispering in the ear of lunatic Black Mask Roman, just saying little things into his ear. I think she said something. I think she did it. I don't think he likes you.
Is she laughing at me?
She is.
Oh, she's not. She's
Just whispering the things into this lunatic's head that he knows will set him off, that will make him snap. And he just loves the chaos. He just loves to drive everyone down this path. And someone that's just a total agent of chaos, like a Joker perhaps, except as this henchman using a person of power to do all this. There's something really fun about that. So of our henchmen, I think he's the most conniving and nasty, and just because of the way that he does it, the most fun of them. And he likes to cut faces off. 7, Daughters of Atlas from Shazam, Fury of the Gods. And if you're gonna do a Shazam 2 and continue to build out the lore, I think this was actually a pretty good villain plot to give us. The movie itself turned out pretty generic, with just more people with capes flying around punching other people with powers. And we're doing, once again, it's all part of the plan where someone gets captured. But if you get into the lore of what went down with the council and how Shazam got his powers, and you give a history to that, and Shazam emerges on the earth and there's people that are angry that that's the case, I think they get interesting. And then beyond that, it's the daughters. And so each one of them has kind of a different motivation.
You are very menacing. I just want you to know that.
Each one of them has a different perspective on how they should try to acquire what they're trying to acquire. And that leads to tension inside of their group. So they're clashing with one another while they're trying to take over Philadelphia. And I think that just added some interesting little layers and depth to it. There's a lot of issues about that film, but I liked a lot of what they did with the lore and the villains. Next up, Steppenwolf and the Parademons from Zack Snyder's Justice League. Whereas Steppenwolf in Justice League was just this totally generic space conqueror that really wanted Mother, in Zack Snyder's Justice League, they add all these extra scenes that kind of go back to Darkseid and flesh out this backstory of the failure of Steppenwolf and how he's so utterly motivated to regain favor and get his seat at the table again, that he's going from world to world, destroying them and conquering them, giving them to his master in order to regain his honor. They did a lot even in making his face so desperate in so many of these interactions, where a character that on most levels has no redeeming quality, especially for me as a human that lives on the earth and doesn't want Steppenwolf to conquer my world and turn it into apocalypse. I don't care about any of the stuff that he's doing but they're able through his face and in a handful of these scenes to make him someone that you're almost sympathetic for because he's so desperate for approval. And there's something very human about that, even in a weird space conqueror. And so just like another example of how every single change made to Zack Snyder's Justice League made things worse, watered it down, and felt like we were missing something. Fifth, White Dragon from Peacemaker. Peacemaker's dad, a character that even before we learned that he's a racist Klan member, he was already a terrible monster of a human being.
He was tortured. His own father tortured him by locking him in a crate for 24 hours with nothing but starving rats. Right?
That was so unbelievably sick and rotten to the core, and played by Robert Patrick, one of the great film villains of all time, great character actor, and he's just sitting there and you just despise him from the moment you meet him, and every new scene makes you hate him more and see just how rotten he is. And you realize that this guy is kind of the villain behind the Suicide Squad in that he made Peacemaker this monster that would kill Rick Flag and be just so twisted. And they just keep going further and further down this path with his character of just a depraved, nasty person that Peacemaker's desperately trying to please. And he doesn't have a big villain scheme. He's not the one pushing the plot forward, but he's absolutely a wretched, memorable villain. 4, Black Manta from Aquaman 1 and 2. And when it came to the first Aquaman, he was our side villain that was kind of a henchman, but with like a pretty well-developed backstory of kind of this underwater pirate that's looting and stealing stuff that cares deeply about two things: his father and making money and being rich and powerful. And Aquaman is sort of responsible for him losing one of those things, so he's going to leverage everything he can to get revenge on the person that wronged him. And that leads him into the next film where he'll seek anything in the world, any power, to get revenge. So, and it corrupts him to such a level that even at the end of the film, he would rather die than get help from Aquaman. And it's a very simple, straightforward motivation, but I think that's also kind of why it feels the most human. We saw the event that led to it, where our hero did the wrong thing. Our hero didn't have mercy. And because of that, he created the villain. And there's a lot to that just kind of makes it interesting. And where some of the others get more convoluted, you forget about them. You watch Black Manta in Aquaman, and you remember the character, and you remember his motivation and what he's trying to do. And that is very important to me on a list like this, where a lot of people, you're like, what were they trying to do? Why was he in the movie? What was that up to? Real quick, before I give you my top 3, remember to join me down below in the comments section. Share your ranking of the DCEU villains if you're up for the challenge. Otherwise, who are your favorites? Who are your least favorites? Also, I'm doing a bunch of these DCEU updates because that universe has ended, and so it is time to rank them one last time. Also, if you live in California or if you live in Florida, I have events coming up near you in the future. I'm going to be in Los Angeles next Friday, January 5th. Less than a week from now, I'm doing a live video recording as well as meet and greet in LA. I'll have details on that down below in the comment section. Also, just keep checking back on my community tab where I'll have all the specific times, location, everything like that over this next week. Who will be joining me, all of that fun stuff. If you're in California, I'd love to meet you there. And if you're in Florida, I will be at MEGACON February 1st through the 4th. And so be on the lookout for more details about that. We'll have tons of panels, tons of meet and greets at that one. Bringing us into the top 3, Amanda Waller from Suicide Squad, The Suicide Squad, and Peacemaker. Superficially speaking, when she's first introduced, she's one of the good guys, where she is an agent of the government trying to do whatever it takes to keep the nation and the earth safe from the growing threats that are emerging after the appearance of Superman and then the death of Superman. Seems like she's a good guy. Very quickly, you realize that she is a wretched, awful person that is usually the person behind what goes wrong. and does not take responsibility for it, and in fact is using the Suicide Squad to clean up her messes. The reason she can't ask Batman to do this stuff is that he would arrest her. He would take her into custody for all this stuff, so she needs villains to do her dirty work.
You disgust me. How can you live with yourself?
So in her efforts to create the Suicide Squad, she ends up jacking up an entire city, and there's even a sequence in Suicide Squad where she kills all of the people working for her because they're not cleared to know what happened there. Just truly, like, probably the coldest moment in the entire DCEU, where very casually she pulls out a gun and shoots people she's been working with the entire movie in the head, and then the plot just moves on. If you're unclear if she's a villain or not, watch that. And then we realize she's behind everything that happened with Starro and Corto Maltese and the upheaval there with the insurgents and everything. That just messed everything up. But she was very happy to be doing all this crazy stuff to Starro, and she has all sorts of evil motivations in Peacemaker as well. So despite face value seeming like a good guy, she's one of the most wretched people in the entire DCEU, and she's always doing evil stuff, so much so that in the third act of the Suicide Squad, a bunch of hardened killers are like, ugh, we gotta save the day. This kaiju's gonna kill all these people. I don't care what she said. And so everyone has to turn on her, including her own people in her office that went on to be in Peacemaker, have to knock her out so that the villains who are in prison with bombs in their head can turn into heroes because she's so evil. Our runner-up, Ocean Master Orm from Aquaman, and then in Aquaman 2, he's more of kind of an anti-hero or redemptive hero. And he's not one of the flashier characters on this list, but he's like a classic, almost Shakespearean style villain. The nature of the plot of the first Aquaman is very Shakespearean in nature, as it's about people battling for a throne, a bastard son, the prim and proper one, but the one with probably more noble character, battling for the destiny of Atlantis. And in the middle of that is Orm, who he does things that are evil for me as a surface dweller. I don't want him to declare war on me, but he's not devoid of proper, like, it's not a totally illogical thing. It's not just power driven. It's not just that he wants to destroy us. It's that he views us as destroying his home and ocean and wants to stop that from happening by striking back. It's kind of interesting. There's a motivation that makes sense. There's a reason that he doesn't trust his brother. The reason, and some of it comes from his father and the way that he's been raised, but he's not actually rotten to the core. He's not driven by wholly like evil or anything like that. He has his character flaws. He has issues. He's someone that needs to be stopped so that I'm not killed by the Atlanteans. But he can be redeemed. And it makes sense that he would be redeemed when they do that in the next film. But of course, the number one villain, Warner Brothers. They mismanaged it from the very beginning. They burned every bridge with the talent that they'd recruited. They angered every single fan. And while there were some victories inside the DCEU, overall, it was a mess because of them. But coming in at number one for me is Zod and the Kryptonians. And the reason that I think Zod holds up so well 10 years later is that they very much intertwined Zod's motivation into so much of what Man of Steel was actually exploring, where you have Kal-El being raised on Earth as Clark Kent, a person with two fathers, two different dads with two different visions for his destiny. And it's all about what is our responsibility? What are we meant to be? Who are we meant to be? How do we use our skills? And some of it even about the choices that we make. And Kryptonians weren't really given choice. They were raised to be one thing. Kal-El is given a choice. Who will you be? And Zod is so firmly raised in the world of you have a responsibility to protect Krypton at any cost. And if Krypton is destroyed, if the governments are causing trouble, then the government needs to be brought down. And even his friends, if his friend Jor-El does something wrong, he needs to be brought down. And if we lose our planet, if we lose Krypton, then we need to go somewhere else. That's my responsibility. That's all I know is that. And singular vision and driven to do one thing. Contrasted with Clark Kent, who needs to choose who will he be? Will he be the savior of the Earth? Or will he be its destroyer? Or will he just be Clark? He has to choose. And you clash those two things together and you get an interesting story. There's just enough details in there where a brand new Clark Kent who doesn't know how to fight can fight an army of Kryptonians because they don't know how to exist on Earth and are overstimulated by their powers and everything. You put them all together and you get a threat for our hero that makes sense. You get mass scale destruction and you get an actual philosophical ideas, themes being explored through our villain and our hero. So for me, that's what makes him great on several different levels. That's what makes him interesting on several different levels. And it's all about how he was incorporated into the story and the ideas being explored. And too many of the people lower on this list didn't really do that. So Zod and the Kryptonians come in at number 1. Remember, if you're looking to manage your money better in 2024, you can get started with Rocket Money for free at the link down below in the description. If you're in LA, remember, I will be there next week, Friday, January 5th, doing a live video recording. Also, if you enjoyed this video, I've got a ton more like it. You see my other DCEU rankings right over there and my ranking of all the DC movies right down there. Thank you so much for watching. Keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.